This is Hear Me Out. I'm Celeste Headley. Federally funded job training is one of those ideas that sounds really great on paper. It's helping workers gain new skills, keep up with the pace of technology, and ultimately stay employed and remain functioning members of the economy. In practice, though, the benefit of these programs is a little muddy. Workers who got trained through the 1998 Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act saw little, if any, growth in their wages. And the in-demand jobs they trained for aren't necessarily in demand because lots of people want them. It's often poor-paying, grueling, dead-end jobs that the government helps to fill. All of this leads us to ask, does federal job training work, or should we reset our expectations?
What a lot of employers want is a steady supply of new workers who they don't have to pay very much. And they want someone else to pay for the training. They don't want to have to pay out of their own pocket to train their workers. They would rather the government do it for them.
Carey of New America joins Hear Me Out in just a moment. Stay with us.
This episode is brought to you by Shopify. Whether you're selling a little or a lot, Shopify helps you do your thing, however you cha-ching. From the launch your online shop stage, all the way to the we just hit 1 million orders stage. No matter what stage you're in, Shopify's there to help you grow. Sign up for a $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/special offer, all lowercase. That's shopify.com/special offer.
Welcome back to Hear Me Out. I'm Celeste Headley. The U.S. Employment Service was created in 1933. It was part of FDR's sweeping New Deal programs. The function of this agency has always been mutable, let's say. During the New Deal, this agency hired people for public works projects that helped the economy recover from the Great Depression. But during World War II, the U.S. began coordinating work details for prisoners of war brought here by U.S. forces. And though its official policy has long been to not discriminate against Black and brown people when making job referrals, U.S. policy in the 40s required that referrals defer to employers' racial preferences, as well as, quote, community custom or past hiring practices, end quote. You can probably imagine what that ended up looking like in the Jim Crow South. There's a lot more history here, but the TLDR is that the history of federal involvement in the job market is complicated. And more than 90 years since it was created, it's worth asking whether the USS is still providing a valuable public service, because our guest today says it's not. Carey is a writer and VP of Education and Work at New America. Hi there.
Hi, great to be here.
So for those who don't know you, tell us what you do.
I work for a think tank in Washington, D.C. called New America. We're, I suppose, a somewhat left-leaning think tank. We work on a variety of different issues, education, technology, democracy, family issues, foreign policy. I head up our work focused on education systems, employment systems, and the intersection between them.
So give us the two-sentence summary of your opinion. We found you because we read your piece called The Problem with In-Demand Jobs. And we were really intrigued by your thoughts here. What's the brief summary of the spicy opinion you bring to us?
Sure. Yeah, this was a piece I published in The Atlantic last week. And it sort of starts back in the 1990s when we made a couple of really big, huge changes that affected society broadly. One, it was the end of welfare as we knew it, of the 1996 Welfare Reform Act. In many ways, all but got rid of cash benefits for low-income families who were overwhelmingly mothers with young children. This was a very big kind of political thing. It was very symbolic of the Clinton administration's kind of more centrist approach, both to policy and politics. And what we also did was we began a huge process of trade liberalization. We passed the NAFTA, which opened up borders, trade between the United States, Mexico, and Canada in the mid-1990s. And that really set the table for China joining the World Trade Organization in the early 2000s, not too much later. And both of these things really destabilized a lot of American households. Turns out, particularly, it began with NAFTA, but particularly with China, led to an enormous loss in manufacturing jobs in wide parts of the United States.
I want to break in here for just a
yeah.
second, and we're going to get back because we're going through a lot of history here. But what I want to get to is your opinion on the job training program, and your opinion is that it's not working.
Yes.
Right? That's the basic opinion here. So the history that you're giving us is sort of the background to why you think that it's not working. And I just want to make sure I am following you, because if I'm not following you, my listeners aren't either. You're talking about the history of social safety nets because the jobs training program is often seen as a social safety net. It is a service that's supposed to retrain people if they lose work. If I'm a carriage driver and automobiles come around, supposedly the federal government is supposed to give me new skills that I can use to find a job in a new economy, right? Or help me write a resume, or refer me to jobs that may be open, perhaps in industries I haven't worked in before. And this is part of the social safety net that you're talking about, which has by and large been defunded. I mean, the funding for the jobs programs, I think there's 43 of them or something, is incredibly low and comes up to less than 0.1% of our GDP. Is that sort of where you're going?
Absolutely. So our one and only response really to help these dislocated households or people who no longer were receiving cash benefits was job training. And it was very much a kind of neoliberal approach to public policy, a very market-oriented approach. A hand up instead of a hand out. People can go to a federal office somewhere, and we will match them up. We'll give them, some money to be trained. They'll reskill. They'll get new jobs. There's a lot of ideological space for this, right? It was kind of a thing that everyone could sort of agree on. So we did that, and then it went on for decades. And over the last 5 or 10 years, there have been a couple major studies of the effect of these federal job training programs. And the studies are pretty unanimous. They don't work. But I want to be very specific about what I mean by that. We successfully trained a lot of people, and we actually placed a lot of people who went through these training programs in jobs. When I say it doesn't work, what I mean is the people who went through these training programs and got these jobs aren't making any more money than similar people who didn't do that. So it didn't have any effect on their economic well-being to the extent that they experienced dislocation because of trade, or they were denied cash assistance. They weren't any more well off than if we had never done these things in the first place. And so that's an important distinction. We did train people. We got them jobs. It's just the jobs weren't any better than the ones they would have gotten otherwise.
But here's the thing, Kevin. Let me start with the fact that nobody's making a whole lot more money. Wage growth has been so slow, especially compared to the growth of income for executives. And that is by design often in our system, that workers just aren't earning a lot more money. I mean, obviously, if you were going to compare somebody going through one of these job training programs with someone getting a college degree, there's going to be a massive difference in earning potential. But, for someone who is making minimum wage to get $1,000 more per year can be significant.
So there's two big things there, right? So one is these are not long-term college training programs. No one,
yes,
from
of course.
No one who can afford to send their kids to, get a bachelor's degree is going to go and say, no, what I want to do is send them to a 6-week training program so they can be an orderly in a nursing home. So they're not comparable. So education and training absolutely do help people make a lot of money. It's just not this kind of education and training. And we can talk about why exactly it's not this kind of education and training. The other thing is you can give people skills, but if there aren't good jobs on the other end of it, then they still don't end up any better off than they were. And the labor market doesn't just magically create jobs to meet the skills of people. There are lots of other things affect the labor market, like the Great Recession affected the labor market in a really horrendous way. The lack of a fulsome response to the Great Recession, resulted in stagnant increase in jobs and growth. Corporate consolidation which gives a lot of power. Deunionization, the percent of American workers who are unionized is lower now than basically at any point before we even began to unionize workers. We're down to about 10% unionization rate across the society. All those structures, minimum wage laws, all those things also determine the quality of jobs that people get, not just the skills that we have. So we adopted a very cheap, a very limited, a very short-term solution, and it essentially didn't work.
The other thing for me is that, are you arguing that we should get rid of the federal jobs training program entirely?
No, I just
all
think
43 different programs.
We probably don't need 43
just need to
different
reform
programs.
them.
Yeah, so I mean, this is everyone's favorite solution, but no one really wants to spend very much money on it. So there are just a vast number of different federal job training programs, all of which are kind of underfunded, poorly coordinated, often not well designed. And this is another crucial thing when they put these job training programs, and the one that I really focused on in the article was the Workforce Investment Opportunity Act, which is the main job training program run by the Department of Labor. But there are others. USDA does them, HHS does them, but this is kind of one of the bigger ones. By law, these programs are essentially controlled by local workforce boards. And the idea, which sort of makes sense, is look, you don't want to train people for jobs that don't exist. People they don't want to move to the other side of the country. So let's get the employers from some local area together so they can make sure that we're training people for jobs that do exist because the employers are the ones who have the jobs. The problem with that is that you really put the economic interests of employers front and center in creating job training policy. And what we've learned is that what a lot of employers want is a steady supply of new workers who they don't have to pay very much. So if their existing workers are quitting because the job is bad and the conditions are unsafe and the pay is low and the benefits are paltry, they can just replace them with someone new. And they want someone else to pay for the training. They don't want to have to pay out of their own pocket to train their workers. They would rather the government do it for them. So if we look at the kind of programs that people are actually being trained for, far and away, the number one job that people are trained for through this Department of Labor program is truck driver. Now, the nation needs truck drivers, right? We got to move things around. There's question about whether truck drivers is a job that may be replaced by automation. We'll see how that works with self-driving trucks, et cetera, et cetera. But truck driving is also a very, very difficult job. And it's become more difficult over time as these big trucking companies put huge demands on truck drivers. And there is a 95% turnover rate
it's also
within the
really
truck
unsafe.
industry. Very unsafe, not regulated well. And so people quit these jobs all the time.
Of course they do, but we're also talking about the things that the job training programs are often focused. I mean, first of all, almost none of the money goes to actual job training. I mean, that's the thing. I was looking at the numbers, and it turns out that of the $4 billion that go to Titles 1 and 2 of the WIOA, which is just this large training program, 0.5 billion of it goes to actual training. So maybe 220,000 people per year. And that skews the results of these surveys showing that it doesn't work. Because I looked at some of those studies showing that it doesn't actually increase people's wages. And the fact of the matter is that most of these studies, the majority of the people included, only ever did career counseling. They didn't do training. So it's, to me, impossible to get a real answer on whether intensive job training for a new job works, because that's not what most of these programs are doing.
No, I mean, you're right. They're definitely underfunded. Although one of the studies I cite did compare people who only got career counseling to people who got the intensive job training. That was the comparison. And the intensive job training, it wasn't that intensive, and it did not lead to any increase in their earnings.
So we have to take a break here real quick, but we're going to come back because, I think that we can both agree that this money isn't well spent without enough oversight. But what that actually looks like, it could be complicated. So we'll come back to talk about that in just a moment. This is Hear Me Out, podcast from Slate. I'm talking to Kevin Carey about federal jobs training and whether it's worth the cost. We'll be back in a moment.
This episode is brought to you by Shopify. Whether you're selling a little or a lot, Shopify helps you do your thing, however you cha-ching. From the launch your online shop stage, all the way to the we just hit 1 million orders stage. No matter what stage you're in, Shopify's there to help you grow. Sign up for a $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/special offer, all lowercase. That's shopify.com/special offer.
Whoa. Landing an account this big will totally change my landscaping business. It's gonna mean hiring more guys and more equipment and new trucks for the new guys to drive the new equipment in. I don't know if I'm ready.
You can do this, and Ford Pro FinSimple can help. Our experts are ready to make growing pains less painful for your business with flexible financing solutions that meet the needs of your business today when you need them. Get started at fordpro.com/financing.
Welcome back. I'm Celeste Headlee, and this is Hear Me Out. Today we're talking to Kevin Carey, who says our federal jobs training, the billions that we as taxpayers are spending on training people, is mostly wasted. That's what I take away from the piece that you wrote. And just before the break, we were talking about the fact that most of this money doesn't actually go to train people. And I say that because there are a lot of jobs that don't require a 4-year degree or even associate's degree that need people, but are not, your typical minimum wage jobs at a fast food place or whatever. I'm talking about things like in the medical profession, there's a lot of entry-level jobs in terms of maintenance and otherwise that need people that require training that could be used. There's plenty of data entry and in the knowledge fields that need people to fill them in. Would you agree that if we were to focus on the sectors of the market that do need people, the sectors that don't require a college degree, that could be more useful?
I mean, absolutely. You're talking about a lot of jobs and a lot of people. Most people don't have a college degree in this country. Particularly, they certainly don't have a 4-year degree or more. And people with 4-year degrees are by and large doing quite well, except for the problem of student loan debt, which is probably a different podcast that we could dig into. There's a lot of need for training. I would say we need to train people for jobs, and then we also need to create jobs. And the jobs aren't a given. The jobs are also a function of our public policies where there's room for advancement, right? We want people to be able to have the first rung on the ladder shouldn't be the last one. They should be able to start someplace and move up. And in the article, I talk about some job training programs, government job training programs in California. It's called the high road training as opposed to low road training. These are done in partnership with the SEIU, which is this huge union that represents many, many healthcare workers, particularly in California. Unions are a crucial component to job training. You don't do it without them because they represent the workers. They have the knowledge about the nature of these jobs, the kind of skills that people do. So to participate, to be an employer who benefits from this job training program in California, you have to collaborate with the workers. And you have to show that there's a path upward for people beyond the first job. And it works. If you decide you want those things and you put some money into it and you partner, you give workers an equal stake at the table with employers, you get different outcomes. And it's good for employers in its own way because there's a lot less turnover in these jobs. People stick with them because they're good jobs. So we shouldn't shy away from the government helping people in job training. We should just do it in a different and better way.
I think, though, that the missing piece that's always going to make job training not work is the fact that, I'm going to go back to what I said at the beginning, are there good jobs left? In other words, we are at such a state of income inequality at this point, where you have companies where the pay ratio between CEO to median worker is somewhere around 9,500 to 1. Or worse, that in terms of what we think of, what many people without college degrees may think of that their parents earned, the kind of careers that their grandparents had, don't exist anymore. I mean, we could just be at a place where nobody's wages are growing really except for executives in the top tier. I mean, I can't see how job training is going to help that.
Well, it's not going to help that. And again, this is a big part of the lesson. We cannot rely only on job training in order to get people the economic security they need. That was the fantasy, right? All we need to do is give people skills, and the labor market will take care of itself. That is not what happened. That did not work. Another example, I cited in the article is, and this is another common WIOA job training program, is certified nursing assistants, which sounds like kind of a good healthcare job, but is not. Okay, it's just another way of saying orderly. These are the very low-paid people who do very important care work. And again, I want to make, I'm not denigrating anyone's job or anyone's work by observing that people are low-paid. Many of these people are hired in the nursing home industry. The nursing home industry is being taken over by private equity. There's been a lot of journalism on this. These big, chains, private equity firms, which are very focused on short-term profits, their path to profitability is to reduce labor costs. So they reduce staffing. There's a big debate in Congress right now where the Biden administration wants to set some minimum staffing standards for both nursing homes and assisted living facilities. The industry is fighting against that because it will cost them money. The way you make your short-term profits is fewer staff, pay them less. Those are not good jobs, and people tend to quit them. And so these federal programs create a pipeline that actually abets this exploitation of the American worker. Improving the training programs by itself isn't going to change that. We need to change the way we regulate these industries, and frankly, the way we need to regulate private equity as a whole. So you're absolutely right. But it doesn't mean we can't do job training well. We need to do that too.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I just keep coming back to whether or not the jobs they're being trained for are good jobs. And I guess what I'm saying is that there aren't good jobs that you can be trained for. Like, if you look at the CEOs of some of the biggest nursing home companies in the country, they're making just an obscene amount of money. And I use that word very intentionally, that while the average certified nursing assistant makes $18 an hour. And the only way that you can have a CEO making the amount of money that they are is by underpaying their workers. So like when we talk about fixing all these other systems, fixing the healthcare system, fixing how people pay for nursing homes, to me it feels like we're missing the elephant in the room, that a job training program could work just fine if there were good jobs that actually paid a living wage. But for people who don't have a college degree or an associate's degree, there aren't a lot of those.
No, you're absolutely right. I mean, we kind of just keep coming back to the fact that looking at training and education in isolation. And again, I am a huge advocate of training and education. That's my field. That's what I work on. But looking at them in isolation or seeing them as the only solution to the challenge of economic opportunity is a failed approach. And that is just very clear. We have trained more people. We are a more educated society than we were 30 years ago. More people graduate from high school than used to. More people go to college than used to. And the wage premium for college credentials remains pretty strong. And yet our society has become more unequal. As you say, there is this growing gap between the overall productivity of the American economy, which has actually been very strong relative to a lot of our peers, and the median wage of the American worker. They just,
workers are not getting the benefits of that productivity.
So all the money is essentially being accumulated in the hands of the owners. And you go industry by industry, and it's very easy to figure out why. And the example you gave of the nursing home is exactly right. It's not complicated actually to figure out what's going on.
Okay, so then let's get back to understanding all that we just said about the limits of these training programs. Let's get back to your idea that we from your piece, it kind of says like we sort of need to throw out the baby and the bathwater. In other words, keep the idea of training people, but completely redo how that's done. You said earlier that we don't need 43 different programs, but those 43 programs, at this point, you can kind of break down even further, right? Because oftentimes is the Department of Labor is within its programs giving that money to local entities who are then the even smaller micro versions of these programs. So we are talking about a massive number of organizations. Is that one of the problems you have with the system?
There's definitely a coordination problem. There's an overall amount of money, even though there's all these different programs. A lot of them are not funded very well. Many of them are funneling in, and we have a bunch of state programs too. Those are just the 43 federal programs. There are also state job training programs.
Yes.
But that often use the same infrastructure. So they all kind of come back to the same place that's very, again, dominated by local business interests. So what can we do? I spoke to some folks from the AFL-CIO. This is another interesting thing about the political dynamics of this. There's a new version of the Workforce Investment Opportunity Act, WIOA, as it's kind of pronounced, the acronym is pronounced, that actually passed the House of Representatives almost unanimously. Every Democrat voted for it. The only votes against were like 26 Republicans who just vote against everything because they hate everything. And this is basically an approach that would double down on failed policy. It would actually make it worse in some ways. It would divert money from the H-1B visa program, which is a program that is associated with very high productivity jobs. These are, H-1B visas are generally for jobs that pay a lot of money. And it would take the revenue and send it back to have more training for these dead-end jobs, right? So it's actually kind of moving us in the other direction. There's also a proposal in Congress right now that would allow low-income students to use their Pell Grants for very short-term training programs that are basically very similar to these WIOA training programs that we use now. So again, it feels like we're moving in the wrong direction. Rather than support low-income students to give them the kind of credentials that we know do lead to careers, we're actually opening it up so that money could be used for programs that don't work, programs that don't lead to good jobs. It's kind of moving us in the wrong direction. And this approach has bipartisan support. I will say I give the Biden administration and, credit for making inroads, right? They have a much different approach to antitrust than some of their predecessors. They're being a lot more aggressive about corporate mergers that really do feel like one of the big culprits in this thing we're talking about. There's just too much consolidation in too few companies. They've been more pro-union than not only previous Republican administrations, but previous Democratic administrations.
Yeah, almost every administration.
But on job training, we're not there yet. And job training, and that was one of the things that I wanted to kind of emphasize, that we're still stuck in the past when it comes to job training.
So we'll take a break in another couple minutes, but I want to get into the specifics of what you mean, what changes you would make. And, one thing that comes to mind for me is the fact that even college graduates are having trouble finding work. Now, in the past, that wasn't always true. Going back to like the 90s, there weren't a whole lot of college graduates struggling to find work, but now they very much are. They are unemployed at much higher levels than others. In fact, the latest unemployment rate for recent grads is 4.5% higher than overall jobless rates and almost double the rate for all workers who have a college degree. So, this brings me back to this idea that we have college grads who are struggling to find good jobs. Maybe the problem is entry-level jobs, period. Maybe dead-end jobs shouldn't exist.
Well, I want to push back a little bit on some of what you're saying. And I actually wrote a piece for The Atlantic on that sort of claim around recent college grads. And you can actually go all the way back to the 1970s and find news articles saying college degree used to be a guarantee for employment. It isn't anymore. This is sort of a staple in journalism.
Yeah, and it wasn't true. But I have to say, again, I'm going back to, say, 2020. 2021, 2022, 2023, the data from the Federal Reserve Bank of New York shows that they are a higher unemployment rate. And a recent survey showed almost 40% of employers avoid hiring recent college grads. Almost 60% said these recent grads are not prepared for the workforce. I mean, this is new. This is recent data within the past 5 years, but it has changed.
I mean, it's new data, but it's mostly being driven by a very, very low unemployment rate in the economy as a whole. I mean, the labor market has heated up. This was happening before the pandemic, and it came back again for a segment of the economy, service workers, people working in warehouses and things. Again, these are not jobs that college graduates want, but they're driving down the employment rate for everybody else. So the unemployment rate for recent college grads is pretty much the same as it was 10 years ago. You know, it's not getting worse in that sense. It's just the unemployment rate for other people is better than it was 10 years ago. But lots of conversations about the wages for those jobs and the benefits for those jobs and the long-term career prospects for those jobs. But if we're comparing rate to rate, that's a lot of what's going on right there.
We're going to disagree on that. I think that the experience of recent college grads is worse than that. But I want to bring us back to jobs training because I want to get into the specifics of what it is that you would change. So you've said that it's underfunded. So I assume one of the changes you would make is you'd give more money to job training.
Yes, that's one of the changes. I corresponded with some folks from the AFL-CIO. In writing this article.
One of the largest unions.
Yeah, one of the largest unions in the country. And they actually have sent a letter to Bernie Sanders, who's the chairman of the Senate Committee on Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions. So this House bill, this new version of job training that's passed in the House will now go to Bernie Sanders' committee. And the letter says, look, we can't accept this. We need to do a better job. And there's really, the fixes they ask for are pretty straightforward. One, we need to give workers an equal voice with employers in creating these programs. Right now, by statute, these local workforce boards that are very, very powerful when it comes to determining what job training programs are available are, by law, dominated by business interests. So the AFL-CIO says, let's even the playing field and give workers an equal seat at the table in making these choices. So that's decision number one. Decision number two is let's have some standards for what kind of jobs we are training people for, right? So if these are low-paying jobs, no benefit jobs, bad jobs, high turnover jobs, let's not train people for them. Those jobs will still exist. And again, to your point, we're not solving everything by doing this, but let's not subsidize them. Right? Let's not put more money. Let's not incentivize the creation of more jobs that are just like that by essentially putting money in the pockets of the employer because we're saving them on training costs and giving their existing workers less leverage to bargain because the employer knows if they quit, there's going to be a fresh supply of new workers to take their place. So those are the big changes I would recommend.
So this is a great transition because I wanted to talk about, the possibility of getting rid of job training, period. But we'll save that for after the break and come right back to it. I'm talking to Kevin Carey about federal jobs training, and we will continue the conversation in a moment. This is Hear Me Out.
This episode is brought to you by La Quinta by Wyndham. Your work can take you all over the place, like Texas. You've never been, but it's going to be great because you're staying at La Quinta by Wyndham. Their free Bright Side breakfast will give you energy for the day ahead. And after, you can unwind using their free high-speed Wi-Fi. Tonight, La Quinta. Tomorrow, you shine. Book your stay today at lq.com.
Today, the Kia Sportage Hybrid has up to 839 kilometers of driving range, so you can drive an SUV with great fuel economy. And today, technology makes every ride more convenient, with features like available remote smart parking assist to get you in and out of tight spaces. 25 years of innovating in Canada has led to today. The Kia Sportage Hybrid. Get great lease and finance offers today. Visit kia.ca for details.
Kia. Movement that inspires.
Hi there, I'm Celeste Headley. Welcome back to Hear Me Out. Speaking to Kevin Carey today about federal jobs training program. And just before the break, you were talking about specific ways to fix the federal job training program. I wonder if, for the exact reason that you were talking about before the break, federal jobs training is kind of a waste of money. And I say that because there are so many ways that corporations have tried to shift their sunk costs onto the taxpayers. That is not just true in the ways that they avoid paying taxes. It's true in terms of things like infrastructure, but it's also true in terms of training. They go to universities and schools and try to get them to shift their curriculum so that it's less about broadening your mind and more about training them for specific jobs, right? They're going to the universities saying, you're not producing computer scientists that actually can do the job day one without any training whatsoever. But to me, in a certain way, job training programs that are paid for by the taxpayer are picking up the cost that should be absorbed by corporations. If capitalist is a true free market, and let's go back to my carriage driver who loses his job because automobiles are now everywhere. If Henry Ford is running out of workers and needs more workers, he should be the one hiring someone who used to drive a carriage and training them to make automobiles, shouldn't he?
So I think we need to think of the different pieces of a whole and how they fit together, right? And so you can certainly say, let's say that the whole we want is one in which people absolutely do have government subsidized opportunities for training, and we want a high minimum wage, and we want strong support for unions, and we want strong antitrust, and we want to kind of get private equity under control. You can say correctly that if we don't have those last four things, but we just have the job training actually acts as a subsidy and doesn't make a lot of sense. But the best outcome for the worker isn't to just also not have job training, is to have all five of those things at once, right? We need to help people develop both broad education, and I should say this is a real thing for us at New America, the think tank I work. We don't see job training as separate, or shouldn't be separate, from the opportunity to go to college. That's another problem, is that we've really class separated these two systems, so you can't move back and forth between them. We have a whole program that's focused on providing apprenticeship opportunities for students starting in high school and then going into their young adulthood. The great thing about the apprenticeship approach is, one, you're not borrowing a lot of money. You're actually getting paid to work while you learn. And two, you're getting college credits. So if you want to advance your career, if you want to broaden your mind, if you want to kind of move into management, you're not starting from scratch on that. So we need an integration between job training and college that we don't have, like right now. That's a good thing. I don't want to leave all of training to the vagaries of the free market. I don't think that's going to work out well for people. But having bad training programs that are too dominated by the interest of employers and, a chronic inattention to the quality of jobs themselves, deliberate attempts to undermine worker power, that's not a good combination either. We need to work on those things too.
Just to play the role of a conservative here, because if you look at the research studies and the surveys that are most loud about saying the federal job training program isn't working, they're not, liberal think tanks. They are conservative, the American Enterprise Institute, etc. And their point is that government is not very efficient and bureaucracy wastes a lot of money. That's something I have to agree with conservatives on. So they would say, stop putting this money in the Labor Department and simply invest it in companies that know how to train people.
But companies don't want to train people, right? Again, one of the studies I came across in writing this piece was looking at the nature of the labor market for truck drivers, right? And so again, we are spending a lot of government money to create a stream of new truck drivers to fill the vacancies that are created because truck driving as a job is a really dangerous and difficult job that people quit all the time. And this was what the study showed was that equilibrium of constant turnover is more profitable for truck drivers than a different equilibrium in which the truck driving job is a better job, it's paid more, and people quit less often. Right. So just from a pure capitalism standpoint, the money sitting behind these companies They like the status quo that is dangerous and bad for workers and is being subsidized by the federal government. That status quo is a function of public policy also, right? So all of these markets exist because the government structures them in a way to exist. The way we structure capital, the way we structure the regulation of the securities markets, the way we structure debt, all these things matter as well. And so my response to the conservatives is that there's no like laissez-faire utopia to solve this problem. It's a different set of government policies that are more balanced, are more focused on the interest of the worker, and end up with a more egalitarian result that frankly will be more productive for society as a whole. There's a difference between the narrow interest of one owner and the collective interest of everyone. I think that's what we're getting away from as well.
But for this agency that has existed for over 90 years, it's really difficult to change course on that ship, on a ship that is so entrenched in the way that it does things, where it has managers and middle managers. And as I mentioned, only a fraction of the money that goes to these job programs actually gets spent on actual training. So maybe there's something to be said for throwing the entire thing out and starting from scratch.
I mean, the Department of Labor is implementing the law that Congress passed. They have, sure, there are plenty of examples of bureaucracy in government, and there are definitely things that the government can do well and the things that the government can't. I'm not suggesting a total federalization or bureaucratization of this process. I do think you want a balance. You want jobs to train people for jobs that exist in local communities. We don't need to get completely away from that. We just need to balance it out in a way that it is very unbalanced right now. And again, I think there are examples of government-funded job training programs that are done in partnership with workers, in partnership with unions, that do have better results from a wage standpoint, from a promotion standpoint, and from a job quality standpoint. So this isn't a purely theoretical idea. It's taking good ideas we already have and applying them evenly across the country through changes in federal policy.
It's going to be very difficult, though, to get support from any conservative on a program that works in conjunction with unions.
I mean, it depends on how you define conservative in some cases, right? I think that definition seems to be pretty fluid these days. We think of conservatism as being pro-business, but honestly, some of the business, interests are being not really represented in what seems to be conservatism in 2024 and going forward. There's plenty of ways for businesses to be very successful and make a lot of money in partnership with their workers. You don't actually need to ruthlessly exploit people in order to make a buck. There are other ways to do it. And I think there are. But if you give people the opportunity to ruthlessly exploit people to make a buck, they'll do it. And it's what's happening right now. So, I'm not quite that hopeless that we can find some ground for people of different ideological persuasions to come together and, build systems that actually work for the working class in particular. So I think that can be a basis for some kind of maybe political deal. I mean,
it's all interesting, and whether one can get anything done in Congress is a debate for yet another day. But I would especially love to hear from any of our listeners who have taken part in a jobs training program or even gone down to get career counseling and get help polishing up their resume, because I think it's important, and it is billions of taxpayer dollars. In the meantime, Kevin, thank you so much for joining us. Really, really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. It's been a great conversation.
Whether you have gotten training through a government agency or not, we just want to hear your opinion on federal job training programs, state job training programs. Is it a waste of money? Is it worth it? Should it be changed? What do you think? You know how to get in touch with us. Our email address is hearmeout@slate.com. Now, last week we had C. Nicole Mason on for a conversation about what trad wives mean for the feminist movement. We got some really thoughtful mail from you about that. So before we go, let's share just one email we got, and this is from a listener named Lauren. Lauren wrote, "Your discussion with Dr. Mason was extremely thought-provoking and made me think of my own childhood and teen years growing up in the Bible Belt of Canada as a Catholic. Having grown up with the Tradwives values, I found that as I became a woman, I began to challenge many of the beliefs I'd grown up with. I found my beliefs aligning much more with feminism, equality in a marriage, equality in the workspace, politics. But then there are reproductive rights. This is where things stopped for me. I could not then and have not ever been able to support abortion. This means I often feel I'm not able to sit at the feminist table even though I firmly advocate for everything that would stop women from wanting an abortion: contraceptive access, free subsidized childcare, mental health care, comprehensive sex ed, an ending of rape culture, and a complete overhaul of our foster/adoptive systems. But can I be a feminist if I can support all that but cannot bring myself to support abortion? I don't know. For now, I call myself a Catholic feminist. Many consider this an oxymoron. Many others consider this as being a traitor to Catholicism. I don't consider it to be either. That's just one of many thoughtful responses. And so, Lauren, thank you so much for sending that in. I think it's a really interesting question. For me, I think you absolutely can be called a feminist. Feminism is about equality, and what that looks like in practice is going to be different for everybody. But it's about having equal political and societal rights, regardless of differences. So we love hearing from all of you. So let us know what's on your mind. Our email address again is hearmeout@slate.com. Hear Me Out is a podcast from Slate. The show is produced by Maura Currie. Ben Richmond is the Senior Director of Podcast Operations, and Alicia Montgomery is the VP of Slate Audio. I am your host, Celeste Headley. Until next time, please speak your mind, but please keep it open.
This is the story of the one. As a maintenance engineer, he hears things differently. To the untrained ear, everything on his shop floor might sound fine, but he can hear gears grinding or a belt slipping. So he steps in to fix the problem at hand before it gets out of hand. And he knows Grainger's got the right product he needs to get the job done, which is music to his ears. Call, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.